For about 3 years in the early 1980s, a small country in the heart of Western Europe was hunted by men it could never identify. They walked into supermarkets on quiet weekend evenings and opened fire on ordinary people, shoppers, cashiers, children, with a brutality that made no sense. They killed far more people than they ever robbed. They took champagne, coffee, a little cash, and left bodies behind them. And then, one night in 1985, they simply stopped. 28 people are dead because of them. Belgium has spent 40 years trying to find out who they were. It has run parliamentary inquiries, chased confessions, pointed fingers at its own police and its own secret services. And it has never to this day been able to give those 28 people a name to blame. They're remembered by the region where they did most of their killing, the Brabant killers. To understand why this case still unsettles Belgium so deeply, you have to start with how ordinary the attacks looked and how strange they actually were. Between 1982 and 1985, in the province of Brabant, the area around Brussels, a series of violent robberies broke out. At first, they looked almost petty. A grocery store, a restaurant, a textile shop, a jeweler, a shop that sold weapons, small targets, small amounts of money, the kind of thing you'd expect from a low-level stick-up crew. But the violence didn't match the crimes. These robbers didn't threaten people to get what they wanted and run. They killed. They shot people who were already lying down. They shot people who were running away. They gunned down customers in car parks who had nothing to do with anything, who just happened to be there. Witnesses described a coldness to it that didn't fit the tiny halls. They'd murder half a dozen people and leave with a few bottles of wine and the contents of a till. It was as if the robbery was the excuse and the killing was the point. From the descriptions survivors gave, investigators built a picture of a core group of about 3 men. They became known by nicknames. There was the Giant, a tall, powerfully built man witnesses thought might be the leader. There was the Killer, the main gunman, the one who did most of the shooting. And there was the Old Man, a middle-aged figure, often behind the wheel of the getaway car. There were probably others, helping, driving, watching. But it was those 3 that Belgium came to fear. What made them so frightening wasn't just the violence, it was how good they were at vanishing. They used powerful weapons, including a distinctive shotgun. They moved with what looked like training. They knew how to get in, kill, and get out, and they left the police chasing shadows. And there was a pattern that a lot of people found deeply sinister. They seemed to know things, how the police would respond, how to disappear into the road network around Brussels, how to stay one step ahead of a nationwide manhunt for years. And the fear they spread was out of all proportion to their numbers. Think about what this did to an ordinary country. The attacks kept coming on Friday and Saturday evenings at supermarkets, the most everyday place imaginable, the place you take your kids on the way home. People stopped wanting to go shopping after dark. They'd glance at the car park before they went in. A peaceful country of around 10 million people found itself genuinely afraid of its own grocery stores, because at any moment, without warning or reason, 3 men might walk in and start shooting. And the police, for all their roadblocks and task forces and appeals, could not seem to stop them. There were near misses that only sharpened the dread. On at least one occasion, the gang clashed with pursuing gendarmes in a firefight and still got away, outgunning trained officers and vanishing into the night. Weapons and vehicles they used were sometimes traced, sometimes recovered, and still the trail went cold. Every time it looked like the net was closing, the killers slipped through it. And the sense grew that they were somehow always a move ahead of the very people hunting them. The killings came in waves, with long, quiet gaps in between, months where nothing happened, and Belgium would start to breathe again, and then it would begin once more, and it all built toward one final, unbearable night. On the 9th of November, 1985, the gang walked into a Delhaize supermarket in the town of Aalst. And what happened there was the worst of everything they'd done. They killed 8 people. Among the dead were a father and a mother, Gilbert and Thérèse van de Steen, and their young daughter, Rebecca, most of a family, wiped out in a supermarket on a Saturday evening. Their little boy, David, just 9 years old, was shot in the leg but survived. He would grow up an orphan, raised by his grandparents, carrying that night for the rest of his life. And then it stopped. After Aalst, the Brabant killers were never heard from again. No final robbery, no shootout, no arrest that ended it. They just stopped and disappeared into history and left a country to figure out what had just happened to it. The manhunt that followed should have caught them, and the reason it didn't is a scandal in its own right. Belgium in the 1980s had a tangle of competing police forces: the local police, the judicial police, and the powerful national gendarmerie, a police force with a military structure. And instead of working together, they fought each other. They guarded their own turf. They didn't share information. Evidence went missing, or was mishandled, or was quietly destroyed. Some of the gang's weapons were eventually pulled from a canal where they'd been dumped, a lead that should have cracked things open, and didn't. Over the years, investigators would come to suspect that the chaos wasn't all just incompetence, that some of it might have been deliberate, because here is where the Brabant case stops being an ordinary crime story and becomes something much darker and stranger. The sheer pointlessness of the violence, all those killings for so little money, pushed investigators and the public toward a chilling idea. What if robbery was never really the motive at all? What if the point of the Brabant attacks was terror itself? This is where the theories come in, and I want to walk through them carefully, because this is exactly the kind of case where speculation runs miles ahead of proof. The most explosive theory ties the killers to the far right and to Belgium's own security establishment. In those years, Belgium had a shadowy far-right group called the Westland New Post, and a splinter of it sometimes referred to as Group G. These were extremists with links, allegedly, to people inside the military and the gendarmerie, and some believe elements like these carried out the Brabant massacres deliberately, as part of what's sometimes called a strategy of tension. The idea is grim and simple. You terrorize the public with seemingly random violence. You make people feel unsafe in their own supermarkets, and a frightened population will beg the government for a harder, more authoritarian, more heavily policed state. Fear as a political tool. Woven into this is the most famous conspiracy attached to the case, Operation Gladio. During the Cold War, several Western European countries secretly maintained stay-behind networks, trained, armed clandestine units meant to resist a Soviet invasion if one ever came. Belgium had one, and a persistent theory holds that people connected to that secret network, or to the far-right groups that overlapped with it, were the hand behind the Brabant killings. It's a genuinely disturbing possibility. But, and this matters, it has never been proven. Belgium held major parliamentary inquiries into the Brabant case and into its stay-behind network. Those inquiries found plenty of incompetence, plenty of rivalry, plenty of troubling loose ends. What they did not find was solid evidence that the secret network carried out the massacres, or that this was a proven state conspiracy. The Gladio theory is compelling, and it may even be partly right, but it sits for now in the space between suspicion and proof. There are simpler theories, too, that it was a crew of rogue, corrupt police or ex-gendarmes, which would explain the training, the weapons, and the uncanny ability to evade capture, that it was organized crime, that it was, in the end, just exceptionally violent robbers, and we've spent decades reading a grand design into what was really only cruelty. And the case has never fully closed, no matter how many times it seems to. Belgium kept extending the statute of limitations specifically so these crimes couldn't expire unpunished. In 2017, a man's deathbed confession, a former gendarme named by his own brother as one of the killers, briefly electrified the country and was investigated and led nowhere conclusive. In June of 2024, the official investigation was formally closed after more than 40 years, and then, only months later, in early 2025, prosecutors announced a new lead, and the probe flickered back to life again. That's the thing about the Brabant killers. Every generation of Belgians thinks it might finally be over, and it never quite is. So who were they? A far-right cell trying to destabilize a democracy, rogue policemen hiding behind the chaos of their own colleagues, Cold War soldiers running a secret war of nerves against their own people, or just 3 violent men who got lucky and cruel and then quit while they were ahead. The honest answer is that after 4 decades, millions of pages of investigation, and the lives of 28 people, Belgium still doesn't know. The witnesses are dying. The suspects are dying. And somewhere in that country, it's entirely possible that the men who walked into that supermarket in Aalst grew old and died quietly in their beds and were buried under their own names, names that the families of their victims were never allowed to know. Thanks again for sitting with me in the quiet dark. Be sure to hit the subscribe button on your way out. I'll see you in the next one.